Not every legend always nails the perfect riff. Sometimes, even the giants of rock stumble on their own pedestal. When the heady sound turns to confusion, when genius gets lost in the studio, and when the name on the cover is bigger than the sound on the record, that's when the works are born that fans, and sometimes even the band members themselves, prefer to forget, but that we will never let slip by unnoticed. Check it out with us, the worst rock albums recorded by brilliant bands.
Just another mind game. Maybe it's just right when the job.
In the 90s, Black Sabbath was attempting to reinvent itself once more. After decades of defining the sound of heavy metal, the band found itself amidst uncertainty, lineup changes, and a music industry that no longer looked at the giants of the 70s with the same awe. Tony Iommi was the sole original member still holding the flame, while vocalist Tony Martin struggled to establish himself in the shadow of legends like Ozzy Osbourne and Ronnie James Dio. The atmosphere was tense. The record label was pushing for a more modern sound, and Iommi himself seemed torn between maintaining the dark essence of Sabbath and trying to engage with a new generation of fans.
What makes you something special? What about me?
The result of this turmoil was Forbidden, released in 1995. Produced by Ernie C., guitarist for Body Count, the band led by Ice-T, who incidentally features on the opening track, The Illusion of Power, the album delivered a sound that flirted with rap metal and groove, but without losing Sabbath's characteristic heaviness. The recording sessions took place at Parr Street Studios in Liverpool and, according to reports, were marked by a confused and disheartened atmosphere.
Mr. Politician, searching for a lie. What's the truth?
Years later, Tony Iommi would confess that the choice of producer was a forced attempt to update the band's sound.
We brought in Ernie C. to do production, which was a bit difficult, really, because I had to leave him to it.
The critical reception was relentless. Specialized magazines like Kerrang! And Metal Hammer branded the album as the lowest point of the band's career, calling it directionless and poorly produced. Fans were also divided. Many simply ignored it. Tony Iommi, in later interviews, was direct.
Forbidden has been a thorn in my side for years.
Tony Martin, the vocalist, however, defended the work.
Well, Forbidden is, I want to say crap, but it's actually not.
Tony Iommi released an official remix of Forbidden in 2024 in an attempt to finally deliver the power that the original tracks deserved.
Can't get close enough to you, 'cause you're just too much.
But not everything is darkness in this chapter of Sabbath. Tracks like Can't Get Close Enough and Guilty as Hell still carry the band's heavy and melodic DNA, proving that even in the worst moments, Black Sabbath was still capable of creating memorable riffs. So turn up the volume, adjust the bass, and feel now a little of the dense and controversial atmosphere of Forbidden, the album that even Sabbath themselves prefer to forget, but which deserves to be rediscovered.
Who are you fooling? You're caught in a complex catacomb of your own inadequacies and
Mr. Politician, searching for a lie. So I won't cry. Inside my world is These are the eyes that can't see me. These are the hands that drop your trust. These are the boots that kick you.
It was the early 2000s, and Metallica was experiencing perhaps the most turbulent period in its entire history. Bassist Jason Newsted had left the band, James Hetfield was facing a hard battle against alcoholism and had to step away for a long and painful rehabilitation. Meanwhile, Lars Ulrich was dealing with media pressure following the Napster scandal, and the band seemed to be crumbling before the public's eyes. Still, amidst crises, egos, and cameras, as everything was documented in the Some Kind of Monster documentary, Metallica decided to press on, recording an album that would represent the group's rage, frustration, and internal chaos. Saint Anger, released in 2003. The recording process was as troubled as the moment the band was living. Without a permanent bassist, producer Bob Rock took over the instrument and helped build the raw, aggressive sound of the record. The decision to abolish guitar solos and give Lars Ulrich's drum sound a completely metallic timbre, almost like a garbage can being struck, divided even the members themselves. The idea was to capture the band's emotional brutality, without polish, without masks, without perfection.
Some kind of
Hetfield stated that the album was simply the best the band could deliver at that time.
There's 2 years of condensed emotion in this. We've gone through a lot of personal changes, struggles, epiphanies. It's deep. It's so deep lyrically and musically.
The reception, however, was explosive, and not in a good way. Critics called the album a disastrous experiment and a cry of desperation set to music. Many fans were stunned by the dry sound, the drum timbre, and the absence of the epic solos that had always defined Metallica. Lars Ulrich always defended the album.
I hear Saint Anger, that's a pummeling and a half. And there's a lot of incredible, raw energy, and it's like, whoa.
Despite all the stumbles, Saint Anger is an authentic and visceral record, a sonic catharsis from a band that, amid collapse, still found the strength to create. Tracks like Frantic and The Unnamed Feeling reveal a raw, human Metallica, and in a way, truer than ever. So get ready, turn up the volume, and listen now to a bit of the dirty, liberating fury of Saint Anger, the album that made Metallica bleed to stay alive.
If I could have my wasted days back, would I use them to get back? You flush it out. Tango around my neck. You flush it out. Some kind of monster. All the shit you fake comes back in the unnamed feeling. It comes.
I invite you on a journey full of psychedelia through albums from the late 60s that influenced everything, absolutely everything that came after. Click on the card that is appearing at the top of your screen. Late 90s. Van Halen was going through one of the most turbulent phases of its career. After the departure of Sammy Hagar and the brief but intense reconciliation with David Lee Roth, the band sought a new direction, something that could revive them and prove there was still fire in the amplifiers. It was then that Eddie Van Halen bet on a new vocalist, Gary Cherone, formerly of Extreme. Charismatic, talented, but coming from a different musical universe, Cherone joined a group that already carried decades of internal tensions and a legion of fans divided between Team Roth and Team Hagar. Thus was born the controversial Van Halen III, released in 1998, an album that attempted to balance Eddie's virtuosity with a new identity and ended up becoming one of the most contentious chapters in the band's history. The recordings took place at 5150 Studios in Los Angeles, under the production of Eddie Van Halen and Mike Post, the latter better known for his work on TV series themes than rock records. And then the drama begins. Eddie took almost total control of the process, recording not only guitars and pianos, but also drums and most of the bass parts. Michael Anthony only played on 3 of the 12 tracks. The closing track, How Many Say I, even features Eddie Van Halen on lead vocals, which had never occurred in the band's history. The sound became more experimental, with long instrumental passages and introspective lyrics, something distant from the festive, contagious spirit that had always marked Van Halen.
I don't know if Eddie was basically making a solo record, which is what Van Halen 3 seemed like to me.
Michael Anthony told Rolling Stone magazine. Eddie saw the album as a personal fresh start, something more artistic and free, but which ended up sounding confused to the public. The critics, without mercy, classified Van Halen 3 as the worst album of the band's career. Magazines like Rolling Stone and Q Magazine described it as overproduced, long, and directionless. Fans also did not forgive. Sales were low, and the tour struggled to fill arenas. Gary Cherone, always diplomatic, declared,
"There were some great ideas and some little gems, but it was not a great record. I had fun, but at times it was like being a stranger in a strange land."
But even amidst the flaws, there is hidden brilliance in Van Halen 3. Tracks like Without You and Once show a band willing to dare, to seek new sonic frontiers, and to explore Eddie Van Halen's more mature side as a composer. It may not be the record fans expected, but it is an important chapter in the band's history. So adjust the volume and feel now a little of the strangeness of Van Halen 3, an album that divided hearts.
Have you ever looked down on a homeless? So don't you
The late 70s, Led Zeppelin, once untouchable, faced one of the darkest periods of their journey. After the grandeur of physical graffiti and the turbulence of presence, the band was exhausted, physically and emotionally. Robert Plant was still recovering from the tragic death of his son Carrick, while Jimmy Page and John Bonham plunged deeper into addiction and excess. The rock empire seemed to be tottering, and Zeppelin, who had dominated the world for a decade, was now trying to rebuild amidst open wounds. It was in this atmosphere of pain, confusion, and change that In Through the Outdoor was born. Released in 1979, the last studio album before the band's end. The recordings took place at the legendary ABBA Studios in Stockholm with a curiously unbalanced lineup. While Page and Bonham were often absent, bassist and keyboardist John Paul Jones took creative control alongside Plant. The result was a sound very different from what fans were used to. More keyboards, more synthesizers, and fewer guitars. The album brought bold experiments like Carouselambra, a long track dominated by keyboard layers, and All My Love, one of Plant's most emotional compositions, dedicated to the son he lost. The album's artwork also became a topic of discussion. 6 different covers, sold in a brown paper wrapper, each depicting the same bar from distinct angles, a visual metaphor for the multiplicity and confusion of that phase of the band. The reception was mixed. Some critics applauded the group's courage to reinvent itself, while others accused it of being a strong sign of decline, complaining about the absence of heaviness and the excessive dependence on keyboards. Despite everything, In Through the Outdoor holds moments of pure beauty. Fool in the Rain is one of the most beloved songs in the band's late catalog, and All My Love shows a vulnerable and human Robert Plant, something rare in the Zeppelin universe. It may not be the roar of yesteryear, but it is the sigh of a legend bidding farewell with dignity and feeling.
So, adjust the volume and dive now into the melancholic and fascinating atmosphere of In Through the Outdoor, the album that marked Zeppelin's last flight before the silence.
The year 1970. Pink Floyd was still a band in transition. Syd Barrett, the founder and main songwriter, had been expelled from the group due to mental health issues and excessive drug use, leaving a creative void difficult to fill. Roger Waters, David Gilmour, Richard Wright, and Nick Mason were trying to find a new identity, balancing the psychedelia Barrett had helped create with the desire to explore new musical horizons. The atmosphere was one of uncertainty, but also of audacious experimentation, and it was in this context that Atom Heart Mother, Pink Floyd's fifth album, was born, a record that oscillated between artistic ambition and sonic confusion. The album's recording process was unique and, for many, chaotic. Recorded at EMI Studios in London, it featured the collaboration of the EMI Pops Orchestra and the John Aldous Choir, bringing grand orchestral arrangements by Ron Geeson that mixed with the band's psychedelic rock. The title track, a suite of over 23 minutes, is a true experiment. Instrumental sections alternating progressive rock, symphony orchestra, and electronic effects. Gilmour and Wright explored unusual timbres, Mason experimented with unconventional beats, and Waters began to imprint his conceptual vision, albeit incipiently. The cover, a simple cow grazing, reinforced the group's irreverent and experimental spirit. The critical reception was divided. Many praised the boldness and originality, but others criticized the album for being verbose, disconnected, and excessively ambitious. The band members themselves expressed negativity about the record. Years later, Waters was ironic.
If somebody said to me now, right, here's £1 million, go out and play Atom Heart Mother, I'd say, you must be f***ing joking.
David Gilmour did not spare the album from criticism.
Oh, a load of rubbish. We were at a real down point. I think we were scraping the barrel a bit at that period.
Despite the criticisms and the discomfort caused by many fans, the album holds moments of pure enchantment. The title track is still considered a masterpiece of audacity, while If and Fat Old Son show the band's more melodic and contemplative side, foreshadowing the Pink Floyd that would conquer the world in the following years. So relax, close your eyes, and feel now the experimental and grandiose atmosphere of Atom Heart Mother, Pink Floyd on a unique and unpredictable sonic journey.
If I go insane, will you still?
Even the biggest names in rock have missed a step. But that's exactly what makes these bands legendary. The courage to take risks, to experiment, to go beyond the predictable. These records may have divided opinions, but they show that even the giants aren't afraid to fail while trying to create something new. Tell us in the comments, which album do you consider a stain on the history of your favorite band?
And of course, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next videos. Thanks for watching until the end. See you soon, and long live rock!